Duke of Edinburgh Snowdonia expedition. Acclimatisation was not as Stephen thought, sitting around getting used to the climate. We had the pleasures of lots of bearing and map work, pacing and micronavigation. We got to meet a few locals as well. Not that this was a particularly pleasurable experience. The farmers, as helpful as they were, didn't seem to want us on their land. We even had the practice of a mock emergency on the Monday. While we were walking through the rain on the crags above Barmouth, we suddenly realised we had lost Phil. We raced back along our route, shouting his name and trying not to laugh. We found him at the bottom of a rocky slope in the most awkward position imaginable. A bustle of activity followed. As we all tried to help, Phil must have been terrified as 6 sets of hands prodded at him. Satisfied that Phil had only a minor injury, we continued on our way. In the afternoon we took to the beach to enjoy the joys of castle and car building. Childish pleasures. It was hardly surprising that our expedition started with the accompaniment of Welsh rain. Despite this, the morning was warm and the air humid, so we decided to avoid our rather fashionable waterproofs. We got soaked. Of course, this action was taken on the advice of Mrs. Erpen. By the afternoon, it was a gorgeous day, with beautiful views of the surrounding hills. When we saw our assessor, it was when we were at camp, and he was a kilometre away, 300 metres above us, on the top of the valley, shouting, "Davy, are you all right?" We didn't blame him for not wanting to descend. We were all over the moon when we received our first wake-up call from Henry, offering us the irresistible option of lots of yummy porridge to start the day. We then had a tedious climb out of the valley, the way we had descended, which wasn't fun at that time of the day. We walked along to the Arran Ridge to the Trig Point, 905 metres above sea level, the highest spot of the 5 days. It rained when we got there, of course, typical Welsh weather. We did have gorgeous views though, so we couldn't really complain. We dillied and dallied all the way down to our campsite, a lovely spot where we got a fairly good night's sleep. We did get a little worried when the other group didn't pass us, and our anxiety was further increased by the fact that every time a sheep bleated, it sounded like a desperate call for help. Still no assessor. Another stiff climb to start the day. We were getting used to these now, but we did have the luxury of a very good track all the way down. We also saw some other DEAGold groups, which was great. Human life forms. We went crazy. A hot day and a rather hard route, thanks mainly to Henry, with 3 climbs and descents before the last climb to our campsite. What's more, Claire's disgraceful maths meant that we had lost 60 minutes on our route card, so we lost one of our lunches. None of us were too amused. In the end, we didn't come in too late, which was very lucky as our assessor was sat waiting for us. We were all tired out and cursing Henry for devising the route and hating ourselves for not changing it. But despite this, we all smiled for our assessor. Mafia, muffin, or mafia, no offence. He raised our spirits by telling us how earlier that day he had been following our progress, hoping to meet up, but that he had been unable to keep up. Our big heads were re-inflated. Majestic views of the Cadder as the sun set, and we had the pleasure of eating Wayfarer meals and lumpy semolina, and Battenberg. This all helped to make our last DEAGold evening together one to remember. All the glee of the last day was bestowed upon us as we packed up for camp for the last time. The views from Cadder were fantastic, with sights of the sea and the hills of yesterday. On this day's route, as if to compensate for the previous day, Hannah had decided she couldn't read, so we were 2 hours ahead of time. We wasted most of this by sitting in a pine forest, discussing college, the future, and other topics of general interest. Rolling into the end, we were still an hour ahead of time, but our plans to swim in the sea were dashed by the fact it was pouring with rain. Instead, we sat in the porch of Fairbourne Church and laughed at each other, except most of it was directed at Henry. Consequently, when Mrs. Erpen found us, we were all in great spirits. With all modesty, we can say we made a ripper group. Sweet, you could say. John and Henry were great at map reading, and Hannah was always there as a backup, picking up the flaws in their techniques, and thus keeping us on track. The boys and Claire Louise were always fast, no matter what terrain, but even Hannah and Claire kept up. We all laughed together and at each other, especially Henry and at Claire Louise's vast knowledge of the birds and bees, or should we say bulls. Pity is required for Claire, though. The Funkmasters have put her through a very tough expedition, and she doesn't even get the award for it. At least the next one can't be any harder. We all had a really great time on all the expeditions, and are very sad to be leaving the Duke of Edinburgh award scheme for the last time.
I think a big thank you goes to Mr. Taylor and Mrs. Erpen and Phil for all the hard work they've put in over the year to get the two groups, especially ours, through this DB expedition. All the effort they put in through the organisation of the youth hostel and the minibus and driving us there, driving us back. I'd just like to say a warm thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of all the group,
Stephen Smith,
Henry Stratford.
Anne Louise, Hannah Wood, Claire McGee,
Jonathan Bridges.
thank you very much.